Hey everyone, and welcome to part 3 of this video series about how to deal with overwhelm. Now, in the first 2 parts of this video series, we looked at adjusting your priorities and spending time on the things that will impact your ability to deal with feeling overwhelmed. Now, it's all very well suggesting a path to follow, but giving ourselves permission to take the first step is a totally different story. And the word story is poignant because of the stories our inner critics tell us. Stories about how scary it will be, what a waste of time it will be, how we're going to fail, or what others will think of us. Now, these voices make us play a really small game in life, and they make us believe that they're the angel on our shoulders, when in fact it's usually completely the opposite. Now, to a certain extent, our inner critics are trying to be helpful as they're trying to keep us safe. Nothing is more crushing to our ego than doing something uncomfortable. Therefore, our ego tells us stories about why we shouldn't do things. Rather than listen to these stories, we should get curious about them. Part of self-awareness is about recognizing our limiting beliefs and where they come from and choosing whether or not to believe them. Last year, I did a course with a company called Positive Intelligence, and they explained that we have a mixture of 10 different inner critics, or saboteurs in their language. Now, they describe saboteurs as the voices in our head that generate stress and negative emotions in the way that you handle work and life's challenges. They sabotage your potential for both happiness and performance. It's a really strong description there. Now, we all have a different mix of these saboteurs, or inner critics as I prefer, some stronger than others. And this depends on our upbringing, life experiences, or even our natural strengths being overdone. For example, one of my natural strengths is empathy, and it's no surprise I gravitated towards being a coach. However, when empathy is overdone, it can make us a people pleaser, meaning that we worry about the opinions of others rather than doing something that's right for us. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the 10 saboteurs and their characteristics. You'll probably recognise some of them from your internal dialogue, so note them. Okay, number 1, the judge. This is the voice that finds fault in ourselves, others, and our circumstances, and it's the cause of most of our anger, regret, shame, disappointment, guilt, and anxiety. The judge will keep bringing up past mistakes or failures, focus on what's wrong with others, and insist we're in a bad situation. The judge justifies its existence by telling us stories like, "Without me pushing you, you'll get lazy and complacent," or "Without me punishing you for mistakes, you won't learn from them and repeat them. And without me making you feel bad about a bad outcome, you won't do anything to change it." I know that some of these sound familiar to you because the judge is always the loudest inner critic in all of us. Okay, let's move on to the next one, the avoider. This inner critic is found in people that always want to be positive, in a really extreme way, to the point that they'll avoid all unpleasant tasks and conflict at all costs. And the fear of the avoider stems from stories such as, "If I deal with this now, I'll hurt their feelings, and I'd rather not." Or, "This is just too unpleasant. If I let it go, it'll take care of itself." Or, "I'd rather give someone else their way rather than create a scene." Now, if we listen to the avoider, we'll say yes to things that we don't want. We'll procrastinate about unpleasant tasks, and our relationships will be kept superficial because we're trying to avoid conflict. Okay, the controller. As the name suggests, this inner critic must control and take charge. And the rationale for the controller is you're either in control or you're out of control. Now, it also says things like, "If I work hard enough, I should be able to control the situation and make sure it goes my way." Or, "Others actually want me to be in control and I'm doing a favour for them." Although those with a robust controller inner critic may get temporary results, it's usually at the cost of others being micromanaged. The controller also causes anxiety as so many things in work and life are completely uncontrollable. Okay, the hyperachiever. See this one a lot. So this inner critic needs consistent high performance and achievement to have self-respect. Now, I see it often in leaders and managers struggling with work-life balance and becoming workaholics. The inner critic dialogue that those with hyperachievers will be familiar with sounds like, I must be the best at what I do. If I can't be outstanding, I won't bother. Emotions get in the way of performance. Focus on thinking and taking action. Or the real nasty one is, I'm worthy as long as I'm successful and others think well of me. I always get a lot of pushback from leaders and managers with strong hyperachiever inner critics. They tell me they wouldn't have the work ethic or success without the hyperachiever. Now remember, we're talking about inner critics being overdone strengths. We should embrace our natural behaviours and skills, but when they're actually overdone, the impact on ourselves and others become negative. In the case of the hyperachiever, peace and happiness are always fleeting, and they're conditioned by the next success. They also lose touch with themselves and their relationships with others, as they're so focused on their achievements. I've spoken to many successful leaders who have all the success and money they could want, and they're still miserable because they can't silence that hyperachiever telling them they're still not good enough. Okay, let's move on. The hyper-rational. This inner critic has an intense and active mind with a strong need for analysis and evaluation. The type of thoughts that someone with a strong hyper-rational inner critic will experience ones like, my feelings are distracting and irrelevant. Needs and emotions of others are distracting from my project. Knowledge and competence are all that matter. I guess a little bit like Spock in Star Trek. Now, as you've probably guessed, people with a strong hyper-rational inner critic can get frustrated at others when they're emotional, or be skeptical of others, and ultimately end up lonely and misunderstood. Okay, the hyper-vigilant. This inner critic is intensely anxious about a situation and thinks of all the ways it could go wrong. And the fear of the hyper-vigilant is, if I plan for the worst, I'll be prepared. If I make a mistake, I fear that everyone will jump down my throat. I want people to trust me, but I'm suspicious of their motives. We can be duped into thinking that the hypervigilant is trying to keep us safe. However, being vigilant all the time can leave us drained, untrusting, and actively avoided by others. Okay, the pleaser. Again, I see this quite a lot with people that manage teams. As the name suggests, people with a prominent pleaser have an intense need to be liked by people, and they attempt to earn it by helping, pleasing, rescuing, and flattering people. The type of inner dialogue you can expect from the pleaser is, putting others first is selfless. My needs are selfish. I need to make them like me. It bothers me when people don't notice how much I care about what I have done for them. They can be selfish and ungrateful. The pleaser can often make us come across as needy, which can drive people away. It can sabotage taking care of our own emotional, physical, and financial needs. And it can also lead to burnout because we've got resentment at others not giving us as much back. Okay, the restless. People with a strong restless inner critic constantly search for greater excitement or constant busyness. They're rarely at peace or content with their current activity, and the stories the restless tells us are, if you rest, you'll be lazy and unproductive. The next thing is going to be more exciting. Or, these negative feelings are horrible. I must shift my attention to something exciting. Now, although it may seem like a playful and fun-loving inner critic, underneath the surface of the restless is an anxiety-based escape from being present, and it could be a strategy to escape from dealing with fears, anxiety, and painful feelings. And this can significantly impact our relationships, as moving on to the next activity is easier than facing uncomfortable conversations or making lasting connections. Okay, the stickler. Now, I see this quite a lot as well. The stickler inner critic demands perfectionism. The stickler's need for order and organisation is taken way too far. So the language that you'll hear the stickler use is right and wrong is wrong. I know the right way. If you can't do it perfectly, don't do it at all. Or others too often have lax standards and I hate mistakes. So people with a demanding stickler can be irritable, tense, opinionated and sarcastic. They can also be highly critical of themselves and others, but they're highly sensitive to criticism from others. Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful. They can work overtime to compensate for others' sloppiness and laziness. Now, the stickler will be a constant source of anxiety for those that listen to it. People with a strong stickler will cause resentment, anxiety, self-doubt and resignation in others, as they feel continually criticised at their effort never being good enough. Okay, the last one, the victim. This inner critic is emotional and temperamental and will focus on painful internal feelings. As the name suggests, it will have us play the victim to gain attention. The victim will tell us stories like, poor me, terrible things always happen to me. Their life is way better than my life. I wish someone would rescue me from this mess. Now, a person with a strong victim will lose all of their vitality and they'll focus on their own self-pity. And although this is a cry for more attention, people will find the constant negativity draining and they'll ultimately keep their distance. So that's a brief introduction to the 10 inner critics. Probably one or two of them sound familiar, but how does that help us deal with overwhelm? Well, when we're stressed and overwhelmed, we resort to our most instinctive and natural behaviours. And this is where our inner critics take advantage of us. So let me start by giving you a personal example. I don't mind sharing that my top 2 scoring inner critics are the victim and the hyperachiever, and they both equally scored high. So when I'm overwhelmed, it's usually because I've listened to my hyperachiever and I've taken on too much. And then my victim will want me to tell everyone how sorry they should feel for me because I'm so overworked. So as you can imagine, it's quite a painful combination. Once I became aware of these 2 inner critics, I could understand their character traits and recognise when I was being hijacked by them. So self-awareness is about identifying and understanding our behaviour and then choosing if it's how we wish to respond. Over time, I labelled every time these 2 inner critics showed up at work or at home. And this acted as a break in the chain. Rather than automatically being the victim or the hyperachiever, I would label them and choose how I wish to move forward. Let's say you had a strong avoider. Recognising this will help you identify when they're sabotaging you with procrastination. Delaying uncomfortable work or situation creates overwhelm because basically they're left to fester and they produce a lot of anxiety. You may have a strong stickler and work long hours because, the work's never done. And recognising that it's the stickler with a gun to your head and not your manager puts you back in the driving seat. Now, I appreciate this sounds simple, and it's not. Self-awareness and behaviour change take time, effort, and holding yourself to account, but it's worth it. 100% of the leaders and managers that I work with dealing with burnout, imposter syndrome, confidence crisis, communication issues, they're all being hijacked by some really extreme inner critics. The impact of recognising our internal dialogue on how we act and perceive our situation is massive. It can fundamentally change our lives and move us towards freedom, authenticity, and happiness. This is a bold statement, but the results speak for themselves. So for now, pick the 2 strongest inner critics and get used to labelling when they're hijacking you. You don't need to do anything else. If you feel sorry for yourself, just label the victim is hijacking you. You can actually take a free online assessment to find out your strongest inner critics. So please message me and I'll send you the link. Please comment and check in with your progress, as I love to hear how you guys are getting on. If you want to know more about me, my coaching process, and experience being coached by me, I offer a free 1-hour coaching session to those curious about leading a better life. Please click on the link in the video notes to book your free session, and thanks for watching and have an awesome day.